What if the gods of ancient paganism never died, but simply changed their names? What if Baal, Moloch, and Isis have been resurrected, cloaked in the modern language of social justice, gender identity, and environmentalism? That's the explosive warning of my guest today on Strange Planet, Pastor Lucas Miles. He argues America isn't just drifting from Christianity. We're hurtling into a full-scale pagan revival. The evidence is everywhere. Hollywood glorifying witchcraft, celebrities casting spells, young people trading Bibles for tarot cards, and political movements that operate like religions with their own rituals and sacraments. And this book carries the powerful stamp of Pastor Lucas's friend and colleague, the late Charlie Kirk. As senior director of Turning Point USA Faith, Pastor Lucas worked closely with Charlie, who wrote the foreword to Pagan Threat. Charlie called him a fearless warrior for Christ and urged Christians to internalize this book's message before America slides into spiritual anarchy. Lucas is also the best-selling author of Woke Jesus, the host of Church and State with Lucas Miles on Epoch Times, and co-host of the Church Boys podcast. He's interviewed figures like Mario Lopez, Kathie Lee Gifford, Jim Caviezel, and Sean Hannity. His work has been featured on Fox News, Newsmax, The Blaze, Flashpoint, and CBN. Again, his new book, Pagan Threat, Confronting America's Godless Uprising, is both a diagnosis and battle plan, a call to deepen discipleship, re-energize evangelism, reclaim the public square, and resist the encroaching darkness of modern paganism. Pastor, welcome to Strange Planet. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
So, pagan gods, Baal, Moloch, are back, only now they're disguised as social justice. How did we get in the modern age to where we are now, a pagan revival?
Yeah, it's interesting. We had people like G.K. Chesterton who said paganism was dead at the early to mid part of the 20th century, but yet here we are where paganism seems to be thriving on many levels. I think that with the exception of the last 30 days since the assassination of Charlie Kirk, we've been living very much in a post-Christian nation. It's interesting when you talk about paganism, we tend to think about a lot of these early forms. The Greek. The Greek pantheon of gods. You have, you have also, the Thor and Odin and these Nordic gods that we hear about, or we might think of something like Stonehenge or Wicca or something. But paganism takes a lot of different forms, and so the premise of this book is this: that there is an agenda to supplant Christianity as the dominant faith in order to be able to inject Marxism into society and have it embraced. Marxism and Christianity are antithetical to one another, and so until the Christian worldview is replaced with something that is more complementary to a Marxist position, then Marxism cannot take root to the degree that the left would like to make it take root. And so to do that, they have to change the moral structure. And through this demoralization of America, it is the attempt to get us to start, basically devaluing life, to start thinking that everything is sacred, that abortion is sacred, and that having a child is sacred, that, gay marriage is sacred, and marriage between a man and a woman is sacred, and this is what paganism brings with it. And so I outline a lot of these things in the book. But the premise is not that, somebody who's practicing paganism is a threat to America. The threat is that there is a bought and paid for a revival that is taking place in this country of paganism for the purpose of changing the mindset of specifically young Americans so that Marxism can be embraced.
Why do you call woke ideology not just politics, but a full-blown religion?
Yeah, I think that's become even more obvious, as time has gone on. Wokeism is not just about a social structure. It's not about an economic, plan. It's not about, even a relational model. It is really at the end of the day a religious adherence. It has saints like George Floyd and certain figures that they hold in that light. It has certain, worship experiences. We saw here recently, even, there's the Church of Bay, referring to Beyonce, or there was a church in Heidelberg that did a whole church service uplifting Taylor Swift in her music. We're seeing the trading of traditional, Christian expressions that have been supplanted, and elements of paganism or human worship have come into that. Wokeism it's a mind virus. And when it comes into somebody's life, it changes their whole framework. It celebrates and looks for a revolution of society for the purpose of bringing about an eschatological outcome for humanity, meaning an end time, sort of a final world. And that is to have this Marxist revolution and to usher in a Marxist utopia. That is not an economic structure. It's not a legal structure. That is a religion.
Talk to me about abortion as pagan ritual.
Yeah. So one of the things I found, there was actually a couple different pagan thinkers and leftist thinkers that I quoted on this, but I kind of alluded to this earlier, is that the idea that both birth and abortion can both be sacred. And so I think that, what G.K. Chesterton would say about that is, when everything is sacred, nothing is sacred. And if everything in the world is equally as sacred, then nothing is supremely sacred, and we begin to dilute the divine. We begin to dilute what is true, what is truly beautiful. We've seen this in everything from, whether it's body image to artwork to the sanctity of life, is this idea that everything should be affirmed and accepted. It does. If you're 500 pounds, we're going to affirm you. This is you be your beautiful self, as opposed to being honest with somebody and saying, look, this is dangerous for your health. You're morbidly obese, and we want to come alongside you and support you. We're not trying to condemn you, but we want to help you. This isn't good for you. You're not going to last long term in this condition. But we've moved into a society where we've lost all grip of absolute truth. And so even something of like, when does life form? This becomes that self-deification. I get to be the one to decide what gender I am, whether my baby lives or dies, when my baby comes alive or not in the womb. I get to decide that. Nobody else. Science can't even tell me that. I get to choose that. That is the deception of paganism that we're seeing right now.
You mentioned paganism being sort of bought and paid for, kind of foisted upon the public by Marxists. I have to wonder, though, why Marxists would choose paganism over, let's say, science, which has also become the new religion. At least, say what we will about pagans, at least they, to a certain degree, admit that there is a higher authority. Why would Marxists focus on paganism, do you suppose, versus, let's say, building a technocracy and worshiping science?
Great questions. And these are actually things I address in my book, Pagan Threat, is I actually believe these things are related. And so what we are seeing, so I start in the book and kind of break down basic, understanding of what is paganism, which essentially for definition purposes here, it is the pursuit of God in practices or paths that are contrary to a biblical understanding of a one God that we serve, Jehovah. And so, we certainly can look at, things like the occult, witchcraft, etc., as forms of paganism. But I think there's other forms of paganism that aren't quite as obvious. There's a particular path of paganism, which is earth worship, and it worships Gaia, the earth goddess. What we're seeing in radical environmentalism, which uses science to shroud and to hide its pagan perspective, is actually still a form of paganism. It is for the purpose of, we have to serve and provide for and worship this earth goddess, and it's this earth goddess that is going to care for us and ensure that we are safe if we bring the right sacraments to it. And so this is what we're seeing in kind of the radical environmentalist movement. I think a lot of what has been promoted from the UN, I have a whole chapter on this. We have seen really drives into some pagan ideas and moves into, again, this eschatological framework for the world, utopia, and they're going to use totalitarian methods or technocratic methods in order to do that. I talk a lot in the book about techno-paganism, The way in which, we think about paganism being this very archaic and esoteric practice, which in many cases it is. But in the modern usage, Marxism has created this hybridization. It is using pagan ideas, but mobilizing them with technology. We're seeing, whether from TikTok Live or Discord channels or whatnot, that these ideas are being promoted and spread. I mean, you can go on TikTok Live and get your fortune told. You can get tarot cards, read to you. And paganism has adapted to be able to take these things on. So there's the individual pagan practitioners that in many cases are less of a concern for me, though I do think they're still on a wrong path as a born-again Christian myself. But I think then there is the broader agenda, which is basically to use all means necessary to bring about this Marxist revolution and new world order, and in attempt to utilize these divergent methods to find unity in their opposition of what they perceive to be the primary oppressor, which in their minds is Christianity and Jesus Christ.
Why are so many young people, specifically young women, I think, because we are seeing a bit of a revival with young men going back to church, which is a positive development, but why so many young Gen Z women, especially, trading churches for, crystals and tarot cards and godless worship?
Yeah, so very, very interesting question. We are seeing kind of a disparaging or disproportionate response from young men right now and young women. So, young men, we're seeing the most conservative generation in some time. We're seeing young men today, Gen Z men, are more conservative than their boomer counterparts. That is remarkable. That hasn't happened in American history in any time recently. What we are seeing among young women is different. We're seeing them trend more to the left. Now, again, I think the last 30 days has been a major impact. And I think the stats from that, we don't know yet. This is going to take some time to unpack what we could call the Charlie Kirk effect. And I think eventually the Erica Kirk effect by the impact that's there. But as far as, leading up to at least, September 10th, what we saw is that the influencers, the household names that were, and I have my cat is coming to say hello here. Very sorry about that.
No worries.
The influencers that we see, the household names for young men, Joe Rogan, Charlie Kirk, Tucker Carlson, Jordan Peterson, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance. It's hard to come up with a household name male influencer of some sort or role model who is not conservative leaning, and in many of those cases also holds to some sort of Judeo-Christian framework. When you start thinking about women who are impacting and role models for the younger generation, who are household names, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, maybe Nicki Minaj, Kamala Harris, AOC, we could name a few others, Sabrina Carpenter. Many of these young women, especially the pop artists, have a history of openly talking about their fascination and practice of different pagan, paths. And so we have people who have said that they carry tarot cards in their purse, that they carry potions in their purse, that they've done spells on, past boyfriends or future lovers that they're hopeful to have in order to try to win them over. Nicki Minaj has said that she somehow was possessed by an 8-year-old boy named Roman, and that he takes over for her when she goes on stage, that he's a deceased spirit, and she tried to get rid of him, but he wouldn't leave, and so now she just lets him perform for her when he's on stage. And so, these are various forms of paganism or occult-like behavior, but these are the role models that a lot of young women have had available to them. And so I think that we have an Erica Kirk effect that is going to start changing some of that. And I am hopeful that other women are going to rise up. I think Riley Gaines, who's a friend of mine, who's been an incredible role model for young women as she has battled the trans cult and everything else that has happened. But we need more of them. And I think that there's a challenge right now. And if we're going to be effective as Christians, then we need a strategy to be able to reach people, I think, with the truth of the gospel and to help bring them out of some of this indoctrination that has been pressed upon them.
Well, I was going to ask you about indoctrination. We have Hollywood pumping out shows like Has Been Hotel and Sabrina. Is this entertainment or is it intentional indoctrination?
I think that there's probably a little bit of both that are happening. I mean, certainly people who have been shaped by this ideology, maybe in the past generation, are now creating content that they believe in or that they're attracted to that just happens to, flow out of the things that they themselves have been indoctrinated by. I think there's also an agenda to recognize. When you start looking at the funding source for a lot of these things, it's a lot of international dollars that go into making many of these things from Hollywood. There is, I think, an agenda, especially from places like China, to demoralize the United States of America, to weaken our borders, to weaken our young men, to weaken our young women, to weaken our families, because they know that is one way that they get to win. And so, again, I'm not trying to pigeonhole this, that this is all on China, but I think there's multiple groups that are interested in the demoralization of America and shifting that out. And the more that happens, the more it creates, less conservative voters. It creates weaker families. It creates weaker military. And so there is, anybody who, is not able to acknowledge that there is a concerted effort to weaken America through propaganda, I think needs to, wake up a little bit more, because it's definitely out there. And I think you have groups like Netflix and Disney that have been co-conspirators in many ways, or at least the recipients of that type of indoctrination to pour that out on the American people.
You link transgender ideology to the occult and feminism to the worship of Lilith. How deep does this spiritual rebranding actually go?
Yeah, so the second chapter of my book, Pagan Threat, I go into a lot of the history of feminism and its ties to pagan ideology. And so there was an attempt by first wave feminists, specifically Elizabeth Cady Stanton and others. Susan B. Anthony was close to this as well, where they created what they called the Women's Bible. And so this was a collection of basically a commentary on existing passages of scripture that dealt with women in some form or fashion. And it sought to rewrite those passages of scripture, or reframe them in such a way that it would promote feminism at that time. And when you started looking at the people that were part of this, there were about 24 to 26 names that were associated with this Women's Bible that was created. You would think, if you were going to do this, I'm going to go find some Bible scholars and maybe a biblical archaeologist and, these sorts of figures. That's not, they got mediums, they got, they had, spiritualists, they had, occultists, in addition to radical feminists that were part of this project, and really kind of just pulling these things out of thin air in order to create a, propaganda for the feminist movement and to try to put some sort of biblical context behind their reframing of these things. So it starts there. What also came out of this, there was what is known as the Lilith myth. Now, this started in, I believe it was the 1500s, where there's kind of an obscure satirical Jewish text that this was pulled from called the Alphabet of Ben Sirah. But the Lilith myth is taking one very small reference in Isaiah that references the night Lilith, which it could be translated night owl or some other sort of creature, but it is very similar to a word for the night spirit or the night demon. And so in this Alphabet of Ben Sirah in the 1500s, it's unpacked further, and there's a whole tale that's told about how Adam had a first wife named Lilith that God created. Their marriage didn't work out. She refused to submit to him. And so he flew off and, became one with, Satan himself, and Lucifer opened up her mind and made her into a demon. And, they fell in love, and that they go on and, create these other spirits. This is real, obviously just fantastic, dark, fantastical tale about these things. But that evolved over time, and Lilith became the symbol of the modern feminist. She was the one to look to if you wanted to stand against the man. She didn't submit to Adam, and you don't have to submit to your husband either. And so, and this is extra biblical. This does not come from any sort of biblical worldview. The reference in scripture is obscure. There was some belief in these night spirits that could come and do something, but it's not really substantiated from a biblical worldview. And so I unpack kind of the different views of that. But where it's ended up, and I think what's important for people to understand today, is that feminism is actually rooted in a counter scriptural approach from its beginning. And I believe that woman was created from Adam's side, that it's God's intention for there to be equality in the kingdom of God, that women should not be oppressed by men. The wife didn't come from Adam's feet so he could walk on her, nor from his head so she could tell him what to do. There was a partnership, in how they were created. And so, just so it's clear kind of where I'm coming from this perspective, but it's been abused. And what we have seen is this counter-narrative approach to the Bible to try to frame basically God as the oppressor and Lucifer as the liberator of humanity, and that he was the one who liberated this make-believe character Lilith that becomes a symbol for modern feminists today. So there's obviously a lot there, and I unpack quite a bit of it in the book, but it's very fascinating, the early roots to and the ties to how the church was involved in the early feminist movement, but from a contrary position by those who were radical progressives at the time trying to counter the biblical narrative.
You argue cancel culture works like a modern inquisition. How is today's public shaming or seeing the same as ancient pagan excommunication?
Yeah, so I think that cancel culture in many ways. I mean, this is it's used at times by the left and the right. I think the left is probably more well known for it, but I think it should be called out when we see it. Cancel culture is basically the idea that if you don't think exactly how I think, then I'm going to root you out, and I'm going to make sure that nobody ever hires you again, and you never get any space or anything like that. Look, if we're talking about the church, I think that, we have a right as pastors to protect our pulpit and make sure that people with contrary ideology are not given place to lead our people astray. That's good. If we're talking in the marketplace, I think that there's room for vast different ideas, and that's how we can kind of, work things out in society. And so, none of us have a perfect understanding of truth, but I think that what we've seen with cancel culture is in many ways kind of this modern inquisition and response. So we have to be careful that as we stand on the truth, as we come back to a primary Christian doctrine, that we are simultaneously not giving a purity test that is so strict that unless somebody sees the world exactly how we do in every single part. And so we talk about these close-handed issues versus open-handed issues. So whether or not somebody believes that Jesus is Lord is a close-handed issue. Whether or not somebody believes that God is creator is a close-handed issue. Whether or not somebody believes, in post-trib, pre-trib, rapture, we can have some conversation there. Whether somebody believes in once saved, always saved versus losing your salvation, different worship styles, different, views on things like alcohol. We can have conversations around that. And I think that we should. So holding fast to that which we know are absolute truths of the faith, while simultaneously, I think having some flexibility and a wider approach to relationship for those that might hold a divergent view over secondary and tertiary issues.
I want to talk about techno-paganism, this fusion of technology and idolatry. Do you see AI, social media, even the cult of the smartphone as a new altar of worship in America?
Well, look, I mean, it certainly has our attention, right? We walk around, the airport and everything else, looking like at our phone, and it's disconnected us. It's been a great distraction, for us. It's been a good tool as well. It's helped us be much more effective at times. It's also helped us be much less effective at times. I think about, St. Augustine, who wrote like 77 books, and, to my 4 that I've written thus far, my guess is he didn't watch as much television as I did in my life, and probably wasn't looking at his phone as much as I was. I think that we could learn a lot from these people that have separated themselves from these things. In working with Charlie Kirk, he always kept a Sabbath. He shut down his phone on Saturdays. He spent time with his family. He would read, he would learn, and I think we would do good to spend more time doing that. With that said, technology is being used for more than just distraction. I think it's being used to uplift paganism. There's people that use ChatGPT like it's a magic 8-ball. They can't make a decision in their life without saying, "Chat, what should I do here? Chat, what do you think about this? Chat, what do you think about that?" And they're relying more on chat than they are the Holy Spirit in their life, and that's a problem. That's a form of a pagan altar. I think also we are seeing it with. I alluded to this earlier, the way in which technology has made paganism more accessible, whether that be witchcraft, whether that be, finding other like-minded people like you, readings, tarot readings, fortune telling. This is, finding, a home within that. We also have people that have said that the Bible is harmful for humanity. We should ask AI to create kind of a golden book of life and just have AI pump out a new Bible for us that would incorporate all the things, considerations of humanity, and we should follow that instead. And so this, of course, is getting into a digital form of paganism where we're asking the pagan god chat in order to produce, a new, commandment and a new way for us because we're rejecting our former God, Jehovah.
You mentioned Charlie, and Charlie Kirk wrote, of course, the foreword to Pagan Threat. What role did he play in shaping or affirming your vision for this book?
Charlie and I met in 2020, and our friendship evolved over a number of years. I began speaking at some TPUSA Faith Pastor Summits. He got a hold of my book, Woke Jesus, was very supportive of that, brought me out to Phoenix, had me interviewed me on his show, as well as at Freedom Night, which is a large event that we do in conjunction with Dream City Church. And Charlie was always he was always so supportive of me. I was 15 years older than him, and there's other staff members my age, but I'm among a few of us that we're older and in the relative sense of TPUSA staff median ages. And I think, Charlie just always gave me a lot of respect there. He would at times run ideas, from a faith component by me. And also, he taught me a lot. I was greatly benefited from being around him. I'm not too proud to admit that somebody who was 15 years younger than me, could run circles around me intellectually. I mean, there's such a mind. And there were times that, I was able to push back and say, no, I see it like this, or I see it like that. But Charlie had a great handle on theology. He didn't need a lot of help or assistance there. He understood the gospel. He spent time reading the word, reading the Torah, reading, commentaries. I mean, he was so strong in his understanding. And I think especially as he got older, his faith became even more prevalent and prominent in his life. And I think that he understood this pagan threat better than anybody. It's ultimately the thing that took his life. And that is this Marxist cult that we're seeing that is warping people's minds and warping the next generation's minds and weaponizing them to be instruments of hate. I think ultimately that's the thing that took Charlie's life. He understood the threat. He knew the danger. But it's not just a threat to Charlie. It's a threat to every single one of us. If we don't figure out how to sustain revival in this nation long enough to influence the hearts and minds of this next generation.
You weren't with Charlie that day, but you've spoken powerfully about it afterward. How did that moment change you personally, his death? How do you see it fitting into the larger spiritual struggle you're writing about?
Yeah, we're 30 days out at the time of this interview, and I'm not the same person. It's different. I don't know to what extent I'm different yet. It's still probably too early to tell. But I think that I could speak for everybody at Turning Point, that we're just not the same anymore. And I think that's true for a lot of Americans as well that love Charlie, that there's just we've become war hardened in some ways, through this moment. And I don't want to lose my, compassion. I don't want to lose my, the love that I have for this generation, because that Charlie lived for that and he would never want to see that happen. But it was difficult. But we're turning our grief and our frustration, our anger into resolve to work harder, to love more, to make every effort to get this message out. And it's been nonstop since Charlie died. I was out of the country when I found out. Took the first flight back that I could. And obviously it was so surreal being at the airport that first day, the day after he was killed. And there was a somberness over everybody. It shook the planet. It shook this nation. I think that this has opened up a potential reprieve where revival has been initiated. God is the only one who can bring true revival. But it's our job, I think, as Christians to help sustain it and to be able to keep it moving and to, fuel it. And so I'm trying to do my part to do that. My church has doubled in size since Charlie was killed. That really happened the first week. One service, we doubled. And I think that's true of a lot of places. Church growth stat is 15% across the country. I think what that probably means is that churches that are being very bold are 30 to 50%, growth or more. And so it's been absolutely incredible to see the result of this. Charlie would be so thrilled with the movement that is being created on the other side of his death. Obviously, I just wish that he didn't have to die in order for that to happen.
Last question. At the end of your book, you lay out a practical battle plan. Can you walk us through the essential steps, discipleship, politics, youth outreach, evangelism, that you believe are non-negotiable if we're going to resist this pagan uprising?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Richard. So there's, at the end of the book, I have, as you mentioned, a 7-step plan for the church to be able to walk through to really see true revival happen. Obviously, I had no idea that we'd be at the moment that we are, but I think the words are even more pertinent, based upon where we're at right now. And so it starts with primary doctrine. We have to have a commitment to the truth of the word, biblical authority. We have to really have a new catechism. I'm not Catholic, but I'll borrow the term. We have to have a new catechism that disciples people into, the scriptural truths to equip them to be able to stand, up in this world. We're partially where we were because of the seeker-sensitive movement, because of the diminished view of scripture, because of biblical illiteracy, and so we have to work to change that. We also need a commitment to evangelism. And so we have to double down on that. We're seeing a lot of young people going out to college campuses in Charlie's Place and going out on the street and doing man on the street videos, talking to people about Jesus. That's all very encouraging. Evangelism is almost becoming cool. And I think that although it's still challenging, people are more open to hearing the gospel than ever before. I think also we have to really double down on our commitment to being involved in the public square, whether that be through politics or school boards or using, commerce and business in order to help, shape the world for positive, into a positive direction and also as a means of sharing our faith. I think that becomes very important. The new ruling from the Supreme Court regarding 501c3s and their ability to be able to endorse candidates and talk about the issues. I don't care if a 501c3 ever endorses a candidate, but I want to make sure they're not afraid to be able to say what the Bible says about gender, sexuality, socialism versus free market, open borders versus national sovereignty, all of those sort of topics. We have to teach people how to think biblically when it comes to the ballot box. I think that, there also has to be a strong usage of technology that, we have to commit ourselves because progressives and Marxists and pagans are not afraid of using technology, and they're using it quite well, in fact, whether it be for totalitarian, policies and rules and controls or to spread paganism through, live streams or something like that. Christians have to get better at this. There's a time where, and I think there's still some of these people in the church today that almost have a fear of technology. That, there are people that are like, well, I just don't want our church to have a website. I just think the internet's a fad and that's not, and now you have to have a website for your church. You have to have probably some sort of a live stream or at least video capture so people can see what you're doing and you can share that message out there. You need social media accounts. You need to be active and engaged on, whether it be, social space or Discord channels or even gaming platforms. Like, let's start some churches in the virtual space so these kids that are gaming, can hear the gospel and pop in Minecraft and hear somebody preaching. Like, all of this stuff is interconnected now. We have to think strategically and creatively. So that's at least a few of the examples that I give, but I outline a complete 7-step plan for the church moving forward.
Actually, I have one more question. It's an easy one. How do we get a copy of Pagan Threat?
Yeah, easy. So it's available wherever books are sold. There are a few platforms where it's sold out very quickly. It's been a #1 bestseller in multiple categories on Amazon. It lived at about #3 to #4 on Amazon for the first couple weeks it came out, which I was quite honored by. It was Charlie's new book. Charlie Kirk's new book was #1. Dan Brown's new book was #2, and Pagan Threat was #3 for a while. So that I was pretty interesting company there, but Charlie deserved the #1 spot, and I'm glad that he retained it for so long. But look, this book's available wherever books are sold. It's done quite well, but more than even book sales at this point, that's the least of my concerns. I just want to make sure to get this in people's hands that can actually utilize it as a resource to be able to stand up in this generation. I've heard from too many parents and grandparents that are worried about their grandkids or their own children and the drift that they've gone through as maybe they went to college or they went to school and they've gotten indoctrinated. This book is an attempt to give something into their hands to help equip them for these conversations and to help them guide them back to the truth.
Pastor, thank you so much for your time. Great to meet you.
Appreciate it, Richard. Thanks.
God bless.
A new Richard Syrett's Strange Planet drops every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.